Hello students, let's get you prepared for tomorrow's test. First we want to look at the topic 5 overview at the parts that we didn't get to in class. So I'm going to start here with this part in the middle on the front side, looking at social unrest. First of all, listing examples of racial intolerance after World War I. We could look at examples like the Red Summer, the return of the Ku Klux Klan is another sign of racial intolerance, as well as some of those massacres, the Tulsa Massacre and Elaine Massacre. And of course, Red Summer, remember, those are the 1919 race riots. How did the government respond to increased immigration after World War I? Pretty simple on this one. We're just looking at the immigration quotas. The one that I focused on was the Immigration Quota Act of 1924. There was actually several at the time, but those put severe limitations on immigration, particularly from Eastern and Southern Europe, and completely banned immigration from East Asia. How does American society respond to immigration after World War I? We see some of the nativism making its return, particularly the pseudoscience of eugenics. There is fear in response to this, the Red Scare being an example of that, fear that communism was coming in with immigrants. And then the Ku Klux Klan, once again, can be a sign of this because the Klan is not just focused on issues of race, but also they are nativist, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, targeting those Southern and Eastern European immigrants. Factors that lead us to the first Red Scare after World War I, speaking of which, that nativism that I just mentioned on a previous slide. The Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia, that's really what trips this all off, is the fear that a revolution could occur in the United States. And then the labor strikes in 1919 were seen by some as a sign that there was a communist conspiracy to overthrow or take over the U.S. government. How does the first Red Scare contribute then to social unrest? So we've got our causes, and now we're looking at the effects. A couple of these examples would be the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, who were basically railroaded for holding radical beliefs and executed for a crime they may not have even committed. And then, of course, the Palmer raids that targeted immigrants in response to a series of bombings that were also tied in with the Red Scare. If you look on the back side here, these questions looking at some of the social changes of that time. So what social changes came about as a result of the Harlem Renaissance? Jazz becoming mainstream, celebrating African American heritage, the development of a shared sense of African American culture too. Just like we're getting mass culture across the United States, even that sort of subculture of African Americans having a shared identity is really kind of strengthened and in some ways pioneered by the Harlem Renaissance. And what societal changes come about as a result of the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing women their right to vote. We see women elected to government office. We also see the new woman idea. Sometimes the younger women, referred to as flappers, fit into this category, but it's a broader category of women sort of challenging the limits on their roles, as well as the limits on their opportunities. Women becoming much more of a social presence, taking up educational opportunities and political opportunities as a result of the 19th Amendment. Positive and negative social changes about the Great Migration. This is, remember, the migration of African Americans north into the northern cities, escaping the Jim Crow segregation and the violence, the lynchings in the South, and looking for more opportunities in northern cities. Particularly during World War I, we see the biggest spike of this. The Harlem Renaissance, because of that concentration of more African Americans in northern cities like Harlem, helps to generate that shared subculture feeling. New economic and educational opportunities for African Americans in the North, and political power for Black voters in northern cities, because concentrating in an area means numbers, and numbers means votes, and votes means power in America. On the negative side, There's a lot of competition for housing, jobs, and services, particularly after World War I, when there are fewer jobs available and more people looking for work as many soldiers returned home. We see that also contributing to some of the race riots in Chicago and others in the Red Summer, and also the Ku Klux Klan returns in its strength. In part in the North, the Klan is just as popular in the North as it is in the South in this time period because of a response to the Great Migration, as well as, of course, immigration, prohibition, and all the other things that the Klan was responding to. Speaking of prohibition, positives and negatives of prohibition and its end results here. The prohibition does cut back on the amount of drinking being done by many Americans, and that does help to reduce some of the problems of alcoholism, although not totally, the violence, domestic violence and stuff like that, and improving the health of people generally with things like liver disease. We're seeing a drop of that, particularly immediately after the 18th Amendment is ratified. We see a steep drop in it, and then it will climb back up, though it never reaches the level again that it was before Prohibition. On the negative sides, we see the rise in organized crime and the violence associated with that, like the St. Valentine's Day massacre, as criminal organizations become the way that many people are going to get access to illegal booze. Since alcohol has been made illegal, criminals are the ones who are going to be selling it. And this also gets at the idea that people were largely flouting the law. It sort of gave a widespread disregard for law and order as people ignored the prohibition law in particular. And this increases the rural-urban divide. The rural areas tended to be mostly where the Dries lived. Many of the people in the urban areas were against prohibition, although, in the rural areas is where a lot of the illegal liquor was distilled. Why is prohibition ended? It's ended by the 21st Amendment, and there's a couple of main reasons for it. The biggest one is that it is impossible to enforce. They find that it's nearly beyond the reach of the government and far too expensive to try and enforce this law. It's better off just ignoring it and repealing it. But the other thing is it's repealed in 1933, which is the height of the Great Depression. And without an income tax, the government is in need of revenue. I mean, it has an income tax, but few people have an income. So the old tax on alcohol was a good fallback. So repealing the 18th Amendment would allow them to legally sell alcohol, which means it would allow the government to tax the sale of alcohol. Looking at the two extended response questions, they're basically the same question from two different perspectives, and I'm asking you to identify 3 positive changes and 3 negative changes. So the first one's going to deal with positive changes from the 1920s, the second one with negatives. You're going to need to give me 3 things for each of these. You need to identify a change. You also need to identify the cause of that change and the effects of that change. So it's not just enough to tell me what one of these things was, what led to it, how is it affecting things. So how is it causing positive change? How is it causing negative change? And you may note that some things can be used for both positives and negatives. So some of the examples I list for you here, the assembly line, the consumer revolution, the Model T, Great Migration, the New Woman, Prohibition, Red Scare, immigration. Some of those can be used both positively and negatively, and feel free to do that. If you want to tell me, the causes of the Great Migration and the positive effects of it in question 1, that's fine. And then you can repeat yourself for question 2, talking about the causes of the Great Migration, but also what are the negative impacts of the Great Migration. All right. Test is tomorrow. Good luck to all of you.